Good morning, Westside. This is your Zoom host this morning, Caroline Nixon. This is your gentle reminder to be welcoming and fix your Zoom name to be your real name so that everyone will know who you are as well as your preferred pronouns. To change your screen name, look for the 3 white dots, usually appearing in the upper right corner of your Zoom window, might be your lower right corner, depending on what kind of device you've joined us on this morning. But click the dots and a drop-down menu will appear. One of the options in the drop-down menu is rename. Click that option and a box will pop up that displays the current name that's showing in your Zoom window. If that's not your full name, go ahead and change it and include your pronouns and click the Save button. Thank you so much for your hospitality this morning.
Good morning. Welcome to worship with the community of Westside Unitarian Universalist Church, where compassion leads us to work for justice and equality. My name is Michael Munoz, and I am your worship leader this morning. I'm glad you're joining us for this service today. It is my hope that this gathering will renew your sense of community and connection and nourish your heart, mind, and spirit. Our reflection this morning will be presented by our very own Westside member, Tanner Trask. Tanner is a member of the worship team, our stewardship chair, and previously served as president of the board, among many other contributions to our congregation. He has been a public school teacher for over a decade, is a loving spouse to Melissa, rescues dogs, and owns a world's best uncle mug. Thank you to our AV team volunteers today, our host Caroline Nixon and co-host Cindy Fountain and Jonathan Sarmiento. A special thanks to Yuki Kumamoto for selecting and playing beautiful music throughout the service. At Westside, we are raising the next generation of Unitarian Universalists, and we want them to know that they are an important part of our community. Several years ago, we chose to be radically inclusive and to adopt a multi-generational worship, where our services include all family members. So welcome to all children and youth. Westside is a community of many beliefs, genders, and sexualities, a community of diverse cultural, racial, class backgrounds, a community of varied abilities and gifts. Some here find inspiration in the great books, others in the great outdoors, and others still in great conversations. Whoever you may be, we welcome you to bring your whole self into this community. If you are so moved, you can try out the chat feature on Zoom by typing in some words of welcome to both members and visitors who are joining us this morning. On behalf of this church community, I say to all, welcome. If you are a visitor joining us today, we invite you to complete a virtual visitor card. Our AV hosts will place the link in the chat. I invite you to take a deep breath. And from wherever you are, settle into this sacred space that we created together. Now let us worship together as we listen to this morning's prelude performed by Yuki Kumamoto.
Our opening words, speaking of those dogs I rescued, sorry. Our opening words are from Kimberly Ann Carlson, entitled A Place of Belonging and Caring. And so you began seeking a beloved community, a place that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to the possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home. Welcome to worship. Our opening hymn this morning is number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song, performed by the Westside Choir.
You're going to do the candle, right? My name is Sarah Munoz, and I'm a member here at Westside UU Church. Please join me by lighting your chalice at home if you have one. The flaming chalice is our Unitarian Universalist symbol of both the heritage of our past and the light of hope within this congregation today. Our chalice lighting words this morning are by our very own Tanner Trask. As we join together this morning and light our chalices, we can take off our masks. Unless you're in public or around others, then you need to stay safe. We can lower our other masks too. Our masks of customer service, our masks of it's just not worth it, our masks of not making waves. Here with us, we serve each other authentically. Here with us, you are worth it. And here with us, it is a sacred act to make waves.
Our chalice lighting song will be lit by Leah Morris, followed by affirmation recited by Oliver Munoz.
There is always a light when we are ready to see it. There is always a light when we are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill, together we will. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to see darkness, shine your light in the dark. We are ready to be it, to see the light, to be the light, to raise around in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always shine your light. There is always light. We are ready to see it. There is always shine your light. There is always light. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise us in the dark of night and be a kindness till we together we will. There is always light. There is always light. Shine your light. There is always light. To see the light, to be the light, to shine in the dark of night and be a kindness till we together we will. There is always shine your light. There is always shine. There is always shine your light. There is always shine. Be the light.
Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another.
Our time for all ages will be presented by Tanner Trask, and then our president, Janelle Weaver, will honor our first member emeritus, Harry Van Dam.
Before COVID, everything was a lot easier. Well, almost everything. Before, if I wanted to show my parents that I loved them, I had to make them a card, or do the dishes without them asking, or try my best to make them breakfast in bed. And if I wanted to show my siblings I loved them, I had to let them sleep in my bed if they had a scary dream, or let them play with my toys, or offer them the bigger half of the cookie. And friends and teachers and the rest of the family, I'd have to help out with class or drive hours to see them during the holidays. But now, during COVID, I can show my family I love them by washing my hands for 20 seconds. I can show my friends I love them by talking and playing games over the internet. Or I can show my teachers I love them by following distance rules in the classroom. And I can even show complete strangers that I have never met before and might never see again. I can show them that I love them, that I care about them, and I want them and everyone they love to be safe. All I need to do is wear my mask. My mask says I love you, I care about you, and I want you to be safe.
Good morning, Westside. This is Caroline Nixon, and I am a former president of Westside and was president when Harry Van Dam was very active in our congregation, and I will fill in for Janelle this morning. We have Harry joining us this morning, and I would love to turn on his camera. So if those who are helping Harry join this morning want to turn on their camera, then we can find you and we can spotlight you for the congregation. A new bylaw has established a new membership category, that of member emeritus. This status honors Westside members who are no longer able to be as actively involved in the church, but have made significant contributions of their time, talent, and treasure during those earlier years with our congregation. Today, we want to honor and recognize Harry Van Dam as the first Westsider to be designated with Member Emeritus status. Harry Van Dam and his wife Ruth joined Westside in 2005, Texas transplants from Chicago. Before various health difficulties beset Ruth, they could usually be seen sitting on the south side of the sanctuary about midway to the back. Ruth passed away in 2016, and Harry is 92 years young. He is retired from AT&T, is a master gardener, has twin great-grandchildren, and makes delicious popcorn. He is also a great bridge player. He and Ruth shared this talent in their home by hosting many game nights for the Westside Bridge group over several years. As past president of Westside's board of directors and representing the entire congregation, I want to bestow the honor of Member Emeritus status to you, Harry, and thank you for your long-term support of our congregation and for your friendship and fellowship. Congratulations to you. We look forward to the time soon when we can meet safely for coffee and present the actual certificate to you. Thank you again.
Our joys and concerns will be shared by Melissa Trask, a representative of the pastoral care team.
As we share our joys with others, those joys are multiplied. When other hearts know our joy shines all the brighter. As we share our concern, our community can offer its care. When other hearts know our sorrow, our burden can become lighter. This is the time in our service when we offer witness and support for one another's journey. Please post in the chat if you have a joy or concern you would like to share with everyone today, and for those who will be watching the recording later. Joys and concerns can be submitted at any time via email to the pastoral care team or through the web form located on the care and support page of the church's website. Today's joys and concerns include, it looks like we have a joy from Stan Yoder. He said, although I have been nervous about rumors of harsh reaction to the second Pfizer COVID-19 vaccination, other than slight soreness in my shoulder, I've had no adverse effects at all. I'm grateful to have been able to get the full vaccination regimen and look forward to the time when we can safely meet again in person, look into each other's eyes, and swap hugs with others who crave human contact. Sharon Sally stated that she received her second COVID vaccine shot on Thursday. And on the subject of that, me and Tanner were able to get our shot yesterday, so that was exciting. And there's a concern from Leotai Bennett for those suffering from the winter storm. And a concern from Barbara Claudy says, family members in my pod tested positive for COVID, but did not have severe symptoms. I've gotten my first vaccine and never got it. Got the second dose today. And thank you for sharing those with us. It's good to share with one another as sharing draws our community closer. Please know that our pastoral care associates are available to support you with deep listening and, when needed, through our InReach Fund for short-term financial support of members in need. We are here for you.
Thank you, Melissa. This morning's centering song is number 391, Voice Still and Small. Then our meditation of shared compassion will be led by Diane Austin.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain, singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
I invite you to join me in a time of shared compassion. Each week here at Westside, we open our hearts to those in our community who know both joys and challenges, as well as to those who may be suffering in the wider world. I will begin with a brief introduction before we move into a time of silent reflection. During the silence, you may want to meditate, pray, or simply open your heart to all who know joy or sorrow. Let us begin by checking in with our bodies, feeling our feet grounded on the floor, our spine rising tall and supple like a sapling, our shoulders and arms relax. If it helps you to center, you can close your eyes. Spirit of life and love and hope, let our hearts be full of gratitude as we share in the joys of this community. And let us reach out in compassion to all who know sorrow, offering our loving presence to those who are suffering, whether that suffering is spoken or unspoken. May we feel our connection to all beings, and may that connection bring peace to all. May it be so, blessed be, and amen.
Good morning, Westside. Cindy Fountain here. Westside Service Project for February is the Texas UU Justice Ministry. Texas UU Justice Ministry is made up of Texas UU congregations working together and alongside other organizations to advocate for public policies that reflect our Unitarian Universalist values, which include justice, compassion, and equity. At Texas legislative sessions, Westside congregants and other UUs have converged on the Capitol to advocate for issues that we value: immigrant, reproductive, and racial justice, for example. As a member church of TXUUJM, dues are only $2 per member. The dues and donations, I had to admit, Harry. The dues and donations beyond membership enable staff and volunteers to testify at the Capitol and other venues on issues such as testifying against a bill that would have licensed for-profit prisons to be childcare facilities in the detention of families and children seeking asylum in the U.S. Also, several board members of Texas UUJM spoke out on the terrible winter catastrophe that we had here in Texas. So they spoke out as representatives of Texas UU Justice Ministry. Please contribute to help Unitarian Universalism maintain a visible, justice-seeking presence in Texas. It will be put in the chat. You can give online through the church's giving page or by using the Give Plus app and select the Service Project Fund. You can also mail a check to the church. Thanks so much for your offering. Now please enjoy this musical offering from our very talented pianist, Yuki Kumamoto.
Thank you for your generosity. And now I pass the spotlight to our member, Tanner Trask, for his reading and reflection in support of the 8th principle.
On April 14th, 1876, a crowd gathered to dedicate the Freedmen's Monument in Washington, D.C. This statue was funded solely by donations from freed slaves. The statue features Abraham Lincoln standing with his hand on the Emancipation Proclamation, the document which freed the enslaved people of this country. Next to him, a black man rises, the chains that used to bind him broken at his feet. Frederick Douglass dedicated the memorial. President Ulysses S. Grant was on the stage with him. Today's reading comes from part of Frederick Douglass's dedication that day. It must be admitted, even here in the presence of the monument we have erected to his memory, Abraham Lincoln was not, in the fullest sense of the word, either our man or our model. In his interests, in his associations, in his habits of thought, and in his prejudices, he was a white man. He was preeminently the white man's president, entirely devoted to the welfare of white men. He was ready and willing at any time during the first years of his administration to deny, postpone, and sacrifice the rights of humanity in the colored people to promote the welfare of the white people of this country. Though the Union was more to him than our freedom or our future, under his wise and beneficent rule, we saw ourselves gradually lifted from the depths of slavery to the heights of liberty and manhood. Can any colored man, or any white man friendly to the freedom of all men, ever forget the night which followed the first day of January 1863, when the world was to see if Abraham Lincoln would prove to be as good as his word? I shall never forget that memorable night, when in a distant city I waited and watched at a public meeting, with 3,000 others not less anxious than myself, for the word of deliverance which we have heard read today. Nor shall I ever forget the outburst of joy and thanksgiving that rent the air when the lightning brought to us the Emancipation Proclamation. In that happy hour, we forgot all delay and forgot all tardiness. So, Frederick Douglass, I should mention real quick that Douglass is not actually a fan of the Freedman Memorial to Lincoln. He would have preferred a statue with a black man standing tall, not one still on his knees. And there's been some modern controversy along the same lines with that statue as well. But I really did like that speech that he gave. Although, when I was a younger man, I probably would have bristled at his description of Abraham Lincoln as the white man's president, having the prejudices of a white man. That's not fair, I would have said. He freed the slaves eventually, and he never owned any slaves. But if I was being honest with myself, I would have been overlooking the times Abraham Lincoln said that he would allow slavery to continue if it would save the Union. The times that he said that there would have to be a superior race in America, an us versus them, and he would prefer it to be the white race. Now, does that make him as bad as Jefferson Davis, the traitorous president of the Confederacy? Did that make him as bad as Thomas Jefferson, who owned people while writing about how terrible slavery was? How do we judge historical figures when it comes to racism, to sexism, to homophobia and transphobia? And how do we judge ourselves? So I'd like to ask that if anything I've said so far, or anything that's going to come after, makes you bristle the way I would have, give me a few minutes to make my entire point, and I'll be swinging by the breakout rooms afterward in case you have any questions then. So, also, do want to throw a promise out at the beginning here. I promise this reflection will not end with some recitation of our sins, with a condemnation of our church and our denomination. There's no twist ending here where I will pull aside the curtain to reveal that we Unitarian Universalists were the bad guys all along, because we weren't. But we do have decisions that we're going to need to make as a community, and we will be holding to our principles when we make them. Well, our principles and Robert's Rules of Order. But why am I here talking about this, about our history with civil rights, about the proposed 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism? And by I mean like a white man speaking to a majority white audience. Put simply, if all that was required for a group to gain the civil rights that they deserve was for that group to work hard for the recognition of those rights, it would have already happened. Frederick Douglass would not have been born to enslaved parents. Rosa Parks would not have been arrested for keeping her seat on a bus. And the Stonewall Inn would never have been raided by the police, and its patrons would have been free to live their lives. Instead, the legacies of racism, of slavery, and sexism still haunt these modern days of our country. Everything from white supremacists and anti-Semites marching openly in our streets, to property in majority Black neighborhoods being valued much less than similar properties in majority white neighborhoods, sometimes by hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the work of building our beloved community is not done yet. And we need to realize that minority groups, any minority group, cannot be guaranteed their rights as human beings without the help and effort of the majority. We cannot ask that all of the work, the emotional work, the intellectual work, the spiritual work, the emotional work, be done only by members of the community that is asking for recognition. If we want true justice in our society, we have to help too. So am I saying that all of this is the fault of every white person in America, that white people are the enemies and the bad guys? No, of course not. This isn't some one side versus another and us versus them, or it doesn't have to be anyway. Before my wife Melissa and I got married, we were able to sit down with our minister emeritus, who was in our pulpit a few weeks ago, Dr. Russell Elevin, for a few pre-marriage counseling sessions. He was just the minister at the time. This was a few years ago. One of the things we talked about was looking at the problems that we would be facing in our lives together, not as a me versus her, us versus them kind of thing, but instead as a both of us versus the problem. So one of the things that never really sat right with me when I grew up in the Congregational church was the concept of original sin, that my parents had sinned, therefore I was a sinner. And fortunately, the First Congregational Church of Wauwatosa, Wisconsin wasn't a very fire and brimstone kind of place. I mean, they taught us about original sin in Sunday school, but then they transitioned to really quickly to the love and saving grace and lessons of the life of Jesus Christ, which I'm pretty grateful for. I've been in some fire and brimstone places since then. No thanks. But how could I be responsible for the sins of my parents? That wasn't fair. That didn't make sense. I didn't do anything. Now, I believed in God and Jesus and heaven and earth, but I tossed original sin off to the side. So I guess before I'd even heard the term, I was a good little universalist. So slavery has often been called the original sin of the United States. It is often said that we will never truly be able to live up to our ideals, that all of us are created equal, until we can repent for the evils of the slave trade. And the more I study the history of our country, the more and more this rings true. But how do I square that away with my insistence that original sin isn't fair, that it isn't a useful concept? And I mean, honestly, I've been thinking about this for a few years, and I'm still not sure I have the entire answer. But the answer I have now is this: slavery is not my fault. The racist systems that were set up back then and persist through to this day are not my fault. I wasn't there. However, I can see the damage those systems do to this day. I can see the physical, mental, and emotional trauma that is inflicted on the marginalized communities of this country. And even today, I know these communities are at the highest risk from COVID, and they have the least infrastructure ready to fight it. So if this isn't my fault, what am I supposed to do about it? And we UUs, as a religion bound by covenant and not creed, can do whatever we want about it. When we learn about a system that is built on the oppression of our fellow human beings, what should our response be? And what will our response be? We don't have a figure or a book that tells us what we have to do. So we can approach this issue not as an us versus them, not as a black versus white, but as an all of us versus these systemic oppressions. And it always surprises me how often a lesson that I was taught by my parents and grandparents as a young child can be applied to my life today. When you're invited over somewhere, before you leave, make sure you leave that place a little bit better than you found it. So for any of the young kids hanging around still watching, if you're invited over somewhere, before you leave, help clean up, help make sure the area you were playing in is a little bit better than you found it, and chances are pretty good you'll be invited back. So I want to discuss a few terms that tend to come up in these types of conversations. Some of them can be like a little controversial, and more often they're just sort of the root of a lot of miscommunications in discussions like this. So I just want to clear up some of those real quick. The first is Black Lives Matter. Now I know a lot of you know exactly what people mean when they say that. But just in case, when people say that Black Lives Matter, they are not saying that Black Lives Matter more, or that only Black Lives Matter. They are saying that Black Lives Matter too. Black Lives Matter also. And too often in America, in our history and our present moment, Black lives don't seem like they matter to everyone. One example out of a whole lot I could have picked would be the Tuskegee experiment. The US government infected Black men with a very contagious disease, then sent them home to see how fast it would spread throughout the community without medical help. This study was started in 1932 and did not end until 1972. These men were never told they had been infected. They were never asked. They never gave permission. Their friends and family and the rest of the people in the community were never told about this. And that's just one example. And that's why the response that, sometimes when people say or put out there that Black Lives Matter, there's a response that comes back sometimes where somebody will say, well, actually, all lives matter. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because all lives can't matter until Black Lives Matter. So next, racism and white supremacy. Now, when I say those words, most of you probably think of hooded riders in the night burning crosses, or white people hurling racial slurs at minorities. And those are absolutely examples of racism and white supremacy, but that's not the only forms they can take. Racism and white supremacy are, at their core, systemic. They are woven deep into the fabric of our society, and it can be difficult to see it if we're not on the receiving end. Segregation still exists. Redlining, forcing certain ethnicities to live in certain areas, that's illegal. But it doesn't really stop realtors and rental agents from only showing properties to the right buyers. And these people probably don't think of themselves as racists, and in their heart of hearts, maybe they're not. But they are perpetuating the system of racism by not showing a house in a mostly white neighborhood to a Black family. And it's not about race, they might say, but property values or the culture of the neighborhood. Judges will, on average, give a Black person a higher sentence than a white person for the same crime. Now, this doesn't happen every time, and it doesn't mean that every judge in America is some secret member of the Ku Klux Klan, but they have been conditioned and taught from a very young age to see Black people as more dangerous than white people, less capable of reform and remorse. And too many doctors in the US still believe that Black people have thicker skin, literally thicker skin, and are less sensitive to pain than white people. Now, our doctors and nurses are absolutely not secret white supremacists, but these medical stereotypes have existed in our hospitals for hundreds of years. It will take time and a conscious effort to expel them. And finally, privilege. This is the word I see the most pushback against sometimes, especially in some online spaces. And the folks that tend to push back against this term believe that if they were to acknowledge that they benefit from some sort of privilege or another, that it invalidates their hard work, that anything good they have earned in their life isn't really the result of their own efforts, but just because of some privilege. And I have good news. That's not what privilege means. Privilege just means that everything else being equal, you may have had an easier time of things because of your gender, skin color, socioeconomic status, or ability status. Personally, I'm a cisgender white man that was born into a middle-class family. And there are absolutely Black Americans that are more successful than me. There are women that are more successful than me. There are people that were born to much worse circumstances that are much more successful than me. Now, that doesn't mean I don't benefit from privilege, and that doesn't mean that I didn't earn what successes I have in my life. I've worked hard to get where I am. But it does mean, overall, I have benefited in some ways from the status quo. One example is when I was in college, I was rear-ended by a police officer in their personal vehicle. The officer it was a pretty minor fender bender, but the officer got out of their car, checked to see if I was okay, called the police, and gave a statement that he was entirely at fault. I was stopped at a red light, and he just kind of knocked into the back of my car. Would that experience have gone the same way if I wasn't white? Maybe that police officer, doesn't matter who I had been, would have responded in the exact same way, made sure I was okay, called in, and took full responsibility. But maybe not. Would I have been able to get the same apartments and house that I've gotten since I left home? I mean, maybe I would have gotten lucky and found apartment complexes and real estate agents that would make sure I got the places I needed to go, and maybe I wouldn't have fit the culture of the neighborhood. Would I have access to the same college funding, the same social circles, the same professional networks? Maybe. So, and I know this is something that gets said from the pulpit at least a few times a year, but if you were to ask a Unitarian Universalist to explain their religion to you, I hope you have a few minutes. But lots of stories will come out, stories that we take pride in, right? Stories of early gay marriages, or at least civil unions when we could. Stories of defying the Nazis and helping Jewish refugees escape the Holocaust. Stories of our ministers and our members marching with Martin Luther King Jr. And those stories are true, by the way. They form an important part of our history, one that we can point to with pride. We were there, UUs can say. We helped make the world a better place. And it didn't go unnoticed. These days, the UUA has an official certification process to show that a particular church is a welcoming congregation for members of the LGBTQ+ community. Westside is one such congregation, and our minister, our worship team, and the rest of our membership, that's you guys, does that work to maintain that certification. We do that work on purpose because it is important to us that we are a welcoming space for our siblings, whoever they love and whoever they are. To this day, there's a Jewish presence in our denomination. We have families with Jewish roots running through Westside, as well as the greater UUA. Beacon Press, the publishing arm of the UUA, regularly publishes the work of Jewish authors. And the legacy of marching with King, with Lewis, that one's a little more complicated. See, after Unitarian Universalists showed up to march after march, protest after protest in the 1960s, they attracted the attention of other civil rights activists. There were a lot of Black Americans that came to visit UU churches during this time period. They wanted to see who was coming out to support them. And they were welcomed into the churches. They were given coffee and pastries, and they were shown to their seats. They had a perfectly nice experience as a guest. Now, maybe there were some awkward questions. Where are you from? A well-meaning member might ask. Where are you really from? They would ask, meaning, what is your nationality or your ethnicity? What's, a few generations ago? And there's nothing inherently wrong with asking that question, but asking it as one of the very first things you want to know about a person could send the wrong message. One UU of color told me that sometimes it can feel like the question that's actually being asked is, you look different, why? And that's awkward. Now, most of the Black guests that came to visit our church left and didn't really come back. They weren't offended or angry, but we gave them no real reason to stay. And when the Reverend Dr. Russell Elevin was in this very Zoom pulpit a few weeks ago, he said, we need to be a relevant choice. And in the 1960s, we weren't a very relevant choice to most of the people of color that tried us out. Now, some stayed, and they did their best to make a space for themselves in our church. They started committees to help focus our efforts as a denomination. They joined boards, they taught our children, they spoke in our pulpits, they ran our stewardship campaigns. Some became ministers. And in 1967, in response to some race riots in the Midwest and Northeast, the Black Unitarian Universalist Caucus was formed. Black UUs were put in charge, and a couple of support groups made up of white and Black UUs were started to help organize and fundraise. This was it. This was our denomination responding to the demands of Black voices. This was our denomination making a space for Black UUs. This was our denomination welcoming them into our churches as family, not as guests. And then 3 years later, in 1970, accusations of the UUA mismanaging the funds of the caucus emerged, and the caucus officially split from the UUA later that year. And over the next few years, the group further fractured until it finally officially dissolved in 1979. Black membership fell and has never fully recovered to the point it was during that time period. But new organizations within the denomination, some like in the UUA, some a little more independent, are representing voices of color. One such group is Black Lives UU, or Blue. They have endorsed the 8th principle. They see the potential in Unitarian Universalism. And this potential has always existed. Unitarian Universalists have stepped up to that potential before. We have given shelter to immigrants when they most needed it. We have saved Jewish refugees from the jaws of Nazi Germany. And we have officially resolved to become an anti-racist institution back in 1997. So now we have a choice. Do we remain as we have been, an Abraham Lincoln of an organization, one that will work, however indirectly, to heal the damage done by racism and white supremacy, but an organization that will remain focused on our majority white membership? Or do we step forward into something new? Do we welcome Black UUs, Native UUs, Hispanic UUs, Asian UUs, LGBTQ plus UUs, UUs with disabilities, recognizing that all of us will one day fit within that category, and UUs of every size and shape into our churches as family instead of as respected guests? So before we make that decision, what is the 8th principle that's being proposed? We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. There it is. Build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. Actively dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. This is the work, if we want it to be. So why do we need an 8th principle? Why would we want one? Haven't we already covered it with our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of all people? Maybe, but isn't the 1st through 6th all covered by the 7th principle, being a part of that interconnected web of life? I think specificity is useful. It declares loudly what we do here, who we are here. Working through the tangled mess of systemic racism and white supremacy that have been in place in this country for hundreds of years will take time, and it will take effort. This tells any potential member, any seeker, that this work will happen here, that they can be a part of that work here. So why not just wait for the UUA to ratify the 8th principle? And honestly, I thought we had to. I thought we had to wait for the UUA to ratify the 8th principle, and that the people who were supporting the 8th principle were like, that was the goal they were working toward. And it wasn't until Roddy Biggs spoke to us a few weeks ago that I even knew that was an option. And we can ratify the principle as a congregation without waiting for the UUA. And to be fair, this congregation hasn't always gone along with how the UUA thinks it should be run. So there's certainly precedent for Westside. Now, I don't think we should rush into this decision, because we need to make sure that we can back up these words as a congregation. It would be better not to ratify it at all than to ratify it and then do nothing and change nothing about our church. Now, I know I said at the top that I wouldn't do some twist reveal at the end about how it's really us that are the problem, that we here at Westside are somehow the bad guy. And I'm going to keep that promise, because I don't think we are the bad guy. But there is a twist here at the end anyway. The choice I offered before isn't the actual choice in front of us. We can't choose to stay as Abraham Lincoln. We can't choose to stay as a mostly white congregation devoted to our white members. We cannot choose that because we have already started the work to move past that. There's a bunch of people and a bunch of groups that have done work, but I want to call out a few specific ones. Otherwise, we'd be here the rest of the day. Sue Anderson, Jane Hardwick, and Rita Faust did some of the work with their class on white fragility. These three members did the emotional and intellectual work to make us a more welcoming congregation, a more understanding congregation, and a safer congregation for any Black, Indigenous, or other person of color that will come through our doors. All of the ministers of this church, at least the ones that I've been here for, and I'm sure the ones before me too, have done some of the work too. In my time as a member, I've seen sermons and reflections on civil rights, on racial equity, and continuing calls to action in the service of our community. And I've seen the ministers do the work too, not just call to action, but move to action. They have all invited speakers too, who are Black, speakers who are members of the LGBTQ+ community, speakers who are Buddhist, Jewish, Zoroastrian, and humanist. And they did all of this on purpose, all of this for a reason. Our staff and committees receive training in inclusiveness and discuss the ways we can open our congregation to anyone and everyone who wants to come. And one day, when we can meet at the church again, we will set out the water bowl for any service dogs that assist their owners through our doors. We will put fresh batteries in our hearing assistive devices. We will put our name tags and pronoun pins back on the welcoming desk. We will refill the little boxes and bags for our kids and set those out on the tables in the sanctuary. And we will look forward to the work that is still undone. And we will, all of us, create the future of Westside Unitarian Universalist Church, the future of Fort Worth, the future of Texas, and the future of our country and our world. Let us make it one that we can look back to at the end of our lives and say with pride, yes, I was there, and yes, I left it better than I found it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanner. That was awesome. Folks, Harry was having technical issues earlier, but he has now joined us, and we want to show him the certificate that's coming, as well as we want to turn on his video for you. Okay, so Harry, this is Caroline Nixon speaking. As past president of Westside's board of directors and representing the entire congregation, I want to bestow the honor of member emeritus status to you. Harry, thank you for your long-term support of our congregation and for your friendship and fellowship. Congratulations to you, our very first member emeritus. We look forward to the time when we can meet safely for coffee, several of us, and present the actual certificate to you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, and to those who helped you join this morning for this very important service.
Our closing hymn this morning is There Is More Love Somewhere, performed by Reverend Lubkin.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere.
Our closing words are from our Soul Matters resource by the Reverend Rebecca Savage, entitled, Forged by a Greater Courage, Let Us Move from This Place. Spirit of life, Spirit of love, we have gathered under the banner of a shared faith. We are born for welcoming grace that extends and receives love. We are touched by the ways we have fallen short of who we strive to be, and are here. We are reborn, forged by a greater courage. Let us move from this place, encouraged and refreshed for the journey ahead. We are gonna keep on together. Join me in the congregational closing as we extinguish our chalice together. Let us go in peace, believe in peace, and create peace in our lives and in the world. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen. If you are a visitor and would like to be moved to our visitor breakout room, please indicate this by sending a chat message that simply